Hello, friends. My name is Chris Aho, and I'm your Sunday school teacher for the next few weeks with Madison Avenue Baptist Church. It is good to be with you, and it is good to be back with you. And forgive me for being a little late this week on this video follow-up from the class that we had, but the week got away from me. And next week, we'll try to do better the next time, right? Sound good? Also, want to forgive the surroundings here. It looks a little bit like a hostage situation, and even though I'm, blinking, it's because I'm okay, not because I need you to send in anything. I'm in the office of Hillsborough United Church of Christ, where I am the interim pastor right now, and so I haven't quite gotten the Zoom background part updated. So bookcases are here, but whatever. None of that matters. What matters is we need to recap on what we did in Sunday school this last week, and I'll start with an introduction to the series. As I was talking with Kevin and Tracy, they wanted us to make sure we kind of rooted ourselves in Scripture, but also being attentive to the times in which we're living. Much of that really accounting for the fact that most of your community feels really burdened by the struggles that we as citizens and people who live in the United States are having with some of the decisions and actions that the government is taking right now and the current sort of political regime. How do we cultivate and maintain and grow a resilience through faith in the midst of a difficult sort of political environment? And so for the next 6 weeks, we have 6 different instances of that happening. And hopefully we will see some ways to frame what we're experiencing that help us kind of embrace and understand what's going on in such a way as to know how to cultivate meaningful, strong, and a growing faith, even in the midst of this. Because the unfortunate truth is, this isn't the first time this has happened in the history of God's people, and that probably means it won't be the last. And the good and bad news is there's plenty of places in Scripture where we can have introduced for us opportunities to understand how God's people reacted and cultivated resilience through faith and through how God was leading them in the midst of difficult situations. Which brings us to the story of Exodus. Our first week one, we'll just turn to the book of Exodus, the story of Exodus, the big picture of Exodus, which starts with the Jewish people, the people of Israel, being in exile in Egypt under the rule of Pharaoh. And as they were in Egypt, they were slaves to the Egyptians, slaves to Pharaoh, and they were brick builders. Basically, they were building things, making things for Pharaoh. And the baby Moses is born and becomes a leader within the community, and Moses becomes the leader of the Israelites with his brother Aaron. Moses is sort of the intellectual leader. Aaron is the vocal leader. But when we reach the Israelites in Exodus 1, we read verses Exodus 1, 8 through 14. A new king arose who didn't know Joseph, so he didn't take care of the people. He said, "Look, these Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we are. So let us deal shrewdly with them, and they will increase. And in the event of war, they'll join our enemies and fight against us and escape from our land." So what the Egyptians did is they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built supply cities, Pithom and Ramses, for Pharaoh. But the more the people were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and every kind of field labor. They were ruthless in all the tasks that they imposed on them. So we see here first this reaction of the leaders seeing a group of faithful people and saying, "I want nothing to do with them because as they grow and increase, they might overtake me." Which Sounds familiar? Um, and as we name some of the difficulties that we're experiencing that are kind of imposed by the leaders right now, we see this ruthlessness in the ICE agents who are just terrorizing for the sake of terror. Um, we see an administration that sees fit to just invade places like what's going on with Venezuela, or now this week we've talked about Greenland. We see the language of politics that is being driven in such a way as to create us and them, to create otherness. We see the exhaustion of just the constant like politics, but like news, like distraction, like all of these serve to erode democracy, erode our reserves, and erode our ability to have empathy. And so, but but in the midst of a chaotic regime, as God's people, we're still called to be God's people. So I told a brief story about how many years ago, a dozen years ago, my wife and I were in Michigan at a family place, and we went to the neighbors to get out of the house to explore something, and we borrowed the neighbor's canoe and head straight out into Lake Superior to like just paddle around, only to like not have realized that like it was a much windier day than we expected, and the canoes are for flat water, not for windy Great Lakes water. And so we panicked because we realized we were in a turbulent place that we hadn't expected to be in. And it wasn't a time then for us to focus on what's the new thing we need to learn. Oh, look, let's explore the bottom. Oh, like let's try this new paddle stroke. No, in the midst of 12-inch waves on Lake Superior in a flat water canoe, we needed to keep the steady paddle strokes we knew how to do, because even though the external circumstances had changed, our goal to get back to safety had not. And so a question that we have is, even though all these external circumstances have changed with the elections going ways we might not have liked it, or us disagreeing with administrations and all that kind of stuff, what was the call? It's to be faithful. And that's what the Israelites would then wrestle with, because what happened as first in Exodus 1, Pharaoh decides, okay, we need to press down on these people. By Exodus 5, Pharaoh says they're not weakening. They're staying strong. And so because they're staying strong, what are we going to do now? Well, take away the straw. Make them gather the straw to make the bricks too. We're not going to give them anything. They have to do all the work. And so again, the pressure gets put on them more and more and more, and they do continue to rise to the task, despite the kind of exhaustion that they're feeling. And it does seem like there's a need for us as faithful people to continue to rise to the task, even as things that we would like to consider sort of building our lives around, and stability that we need to kind of trust things seems to be going away, and more pressure is placed on us. In the chapters between Exodus 5 and Exodus 14, which was the last section of scripture that we read, you have the 10 plagues that come to Egypt, and finally you have Pharaoh letting the Israelites go, telling them, you can leave. I don't want any more of these plagues on us. And so in their leaving, they take off. But right after they leave, Pharaoh changes his mind. And so in Exodus 14, the people are making their way towards the Red Sea, and they realize that Pharaoh's army has decided, oh, we're going to come get you. And so it chases the people down, and they get to the edge of the shore, and they look at Moses and say, wait, why did you even bring us here? Like, we thought you were going to save us. Now are you just going to have us buried here by the shore because there weren't enough graves in Egypt? Like, they're going to slaughter us. Like, and what we know happens next then is God creates a way for the Israelites to escape that they couldn't see themselves. And if there's one kind of overarching story of what God does through all of scriptures, it might just be that God shows a way, God reveals a way, God brings about ways that are beyond our ability to conceive what they might be beforehand. And so in Exodus chapter, beyond 14, we know the waters part. We know the people make their way. We know they then wander for years, and the struggle of oppression under a regime changes to the struggle of how do we live in community now that we are free from the oppressive regime. And that's a different story to think about, with its own struggles and wrestling and goods and bads. But what we discovered this week, as we think about Pharaoh, as we think of Pharaoh oppressing the Israelites, is that we have a regime in the Exodus that is operating on fear and trafficking in fear in order to keep people down. And fear is everywhere. Pharaoh is afraid of losing control. Pharaoh uses fear to justify his oppression. The people are afraid when resistance makes life worse. The people are afraid even after they begin to get their freedom. Well, what if we get what does it mean to be free, and are we going to survive that? But what we do with that is realize that fear is a tactic, and fear is not where something ends. Naming fear is how we begin to address it. And so we address that we live in a world that is driven right now by fear. It's driven by algorithms, it's driven by all kinds of things, but fear makes the news. If it bleeds, it leads, right? Fear and shock lead in such ways that can serve to allow us to be oppressed or to self-oppress at times. And so recognize first that we're in a time where we are being pressed upon through tactics driven by fear. But fear doesn't decide the future. Actually, fear is never a good way to make a decision. And so Moses doesn't let the people being afraid stop him. He doesn't turn around at the water and go back to renegotiate with the army. Moses knows he's called to carry the people out of Egypt. And so Moses sticks to what he's called to, regardless of where fear is coming in, whether it's fear from Pharaoh, fear from the people at the shore of the sea, fear from within, fear from within himself. Moses is an example in how to follow the call faithfully, which then will lead to, once they're out from under Pharaoh's control, what are the moral questions that they'll have to face? And that's for a different Bible study at a different time. But the question for this week is, where do we see the fear, and how do we cultivate and practice faith that speaks truth in the midst of those imposing fear, and speaks truth to the fear that they seek to impose? And then how do we not allow fear to determine how we are shaped or what we become for others? Exodus, the story of Exodus is about people getting freedom from an oppressive system. And it didn't happen overnight. It took a long time. They were in the wilderness for 40 some years. And there were many generations that had lived as brick builders for Pharaoh before the new king came. So Exodus is a story about an oppressive regime leaning on people in order to get what it needs out of them, rather than letting them live in the freedom that we all believe everyone should have. And so it's a great story for us to be attentive to as we think about living in such a way that is resilient amid a difficult and trying time. And I hope maybe you've seen some of that. And I hope that you'll remember that regardless of who is elected, regardless of who's in charge, regardless of who is around us, the call that God places on us to be people of love and care and support, to be people that embody God's kingdom come, God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That call doesn't change regardless of who else is around us. Looking to next week, it's Martin Luther King weekend, and so we are going to turn to the minor prophet of Amos to cite a scripture and a section of passage that King used, and then we'll continue for 4 more weeks after that. It's been good to be with you. I look forward to discussion and to follow up. And if you have any questions at all, reach out. Otherwise, I'll see you on Sunday morning, and I look forward to reconnecting with you then. Thanks so much. Have a great week.